Welcome to another episode of Message from Mom, where we are busting the myth that mothers-in-law aren't necessarily monsters-in-law. And I'm joined by my lovely co-host, who happen to be my daughters-in-law. So to the left of me is Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly, and I'm married to Beth's oldest son, Alex.
And to the right of me is Chelsea.
Hi, I'm Chelsea, and I'm married to Beth's middle son, Andrew.
Okay, ladies. Well, we have a very it's a serious topic, but I think it's a topic that we need to really address, because one thing I know is that everyone that is alive on planet Earth will experience this in their lifetime. So, but before we get into our episode dealing with grief, let's raise our glasses for another toast. We have another episode.
Cheers.
Because we know that you don't have to be a blood relative to love your relative. So cheers, ladies. Okay. And as I said, we're discussing grief today. And grief is something, as I said, something that everyone will deal with in their life, because one thing I do also know is that no one gets out of here alive, even though we're fascinated with longevity these days. But grief most likely is going to come knocking at everyone's door. And this is a topic that I have had to deal with personally with the loss of my well, first I can go back. I lost my dad when I was 30 years old, and that was really quite a momentous time. I was married. I had two of the boys were already here. Andrew was 6 weeks old. AJ was 4. And I can remember just feeling adrift for about a year, because losing my dad, it was really, I honestly felt like I was an orphan, even though I had so many, wonderful things and great things going on in my own life. But it really did. It took me, and I think I really felt very surprised at how low I really did feel. So that was my first experience with grief. And then 5 years ago, I lost my husband to cancer. And losing a spouse is so much different than losing your parent. And it was definitely a huge moment in my life. I was 60 years old, and honestly, going from we to me was probably one of the most challenging things that I've ever had to do and to go through. And so that's why I really thought that grief would be it's not wonderful, but a special topic to talk about, because I know that many other people are struggling with grief. And especially as we age, we start to lose more and more of our family members and our friends and all of that. So I can touch on my own experience with that. And also any things that I've learned in the past 5 years, because I can't say that grief isn't linear. I mean, there's a lot of things that grief isn't. And one thing I know, it's not linear at all. It's not like, you go from A to B to C to D. And there are so many things that happen with you, both physically and mentally. And so I really did just want to touch on this great article that we have that's really our reference point, and it's what grief does to your brain and how to cope with it, because there really are physical impacts as well as emotional impacts on our bodies, so on our brains and on our bodies. And so I think that that's really important to touch on, because I'm not necessarily sure if I was really aware of all of those things going on in my life at the time. But I look back at photos of me, really, especially the first year that I lost Mac, and I can just see grief just written all over my face. I mean, it definitely impacted me on a physical and emotional level. And also too, for me, I'd been married for 35 years and styled a certain age, had just gotten up and running. And so I was a businesswoman. So it wasn't just me trying to figure out how to go from we to me, but also how to run my business all by myself, not have my biggest cheerleader in the world by my side. I didn't have that support system anymore. And so that had a huge impact on me too. So, and also I have spoken about grief. I've almost had a yearly post about grief, and I've had YouTube videos also about grief too. Just my personal experience, because I that's the only thing that I can stem from. But um, as I said, everyone is going to go through grief, and my personal experience that I'll talk about today is death, but it doesn't necessarily have to be death.
Mhm.
It can be, I mean, we can grieve so many things in our life. We can grieve uh, a relationship, a breakup. We can grieve a loss of a job or a loss of career. We can grieve our children, when we become empty nesters. We can be, I see some people go through that. So, and also too, I mean, one thing I know is that grief comes in many forms. It's not linear, and you have to go through it. This is the one thing you truly cannot just brush under the rug. You can't avoid it. It's just something that you have to tackle head on, and you have to go through it. And it is hard. It is hard work. And where my life is today, 5 years, and it's been 5 years since I lost Mac, and that's why I thought it would be a timely topic for us to talk about on the podcast. But it's been 5 years, and where I am today as a single woman, I don't dread the word widow anymore. I can remember when I first lost him, I was just like, ugh, I'm that I don't want to be a widow. There's a lot of kind of anger that goes through that. I don't want that word attached to me. But now I'm very open and upfront about it. Yes, I am a widow. I've learned to adapt. I've learned to adopt, and so and as I said, I've had to work through it. So I have a lot of things that I can share personally. But I just thought I would just kick off today's podcast, and because I'm just curious with both of you. And so I'll throw this question out first. I'll throw it out to you, Kelly.
Okay.
But what is a time period in your life in which you were faced with grief?
Well, over the years, there have been many, but I'll go to the most recent one. And it was actually kind of the most shocking one because it was a friend of mine who passed away last December. And he was young. He was only in his early 50s and had a horrible bout with crazy rare cancer and died way too young.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit him hard and fast, and the decline was swift. And he happens to be the partner of my best friend. And so it was really hard to not only lose him, but also to see her go through everything that she had to, with not only caring for him and dealing with, just the news of it, but then going through it. So that's the most recent confrontation that I've had with serious grief in terms of death.
In terms of death. Okay. And we can circle back around and talk about different areas of your life,
Sure.
Further on. But Chelsea, so what is a time period in your life in which you were faced with grief?
Well, I think the first time that I was ever faced with grief was probably when I was 10 and my Nana Shirley passed away. That's my dad's mom. We were pretty close. I would say I love both of I call my one Nana on my mom's side just Nana, and then she was Nana Shirley. But I would definitely say when I was younger, Nana Shirley was kind of like the fun grandma. Not that my Nana isn't. She's just a little bit more
She's just different,
like proper. And Nana Shirley was like the one that was like, oh, let's, here's your Gatorade and your Coke, and let's go to the mall and let's go to the movies. But yeah, she passed away, and it was pretty sudden as well. She was only 58 at the time, and she had a stroke. And then basically my mom and my dad picked me up from my elementary school. We drove down to Florida. She had another stroke and then passed away.
Oh, so it's very quick.
It was super quick. Yeah.
Yes. And she's 58.
She was 58.
That's very young. That's very young. And Kelly, how old was Kent?
I can't remember totally. He's just a few years older than me. So he might've been like 50, 51.
Early 50s.
Yeah. Very
young.
Yeah.
And my dad was 55, and I don't know. And I've thought about this too, especially as a parent. I think one of the probably most challenging things to go through would be the death of your child, because we expect, like our parents. I mean, I didn't expect my dad to die so young, but we do. We know that that's going to be a reality in our life. But when it's someone young, or a child, I think that those could be the most
Mhm.
challenging.
Yeah, they hit a little harder.
Yes, I think they
It's
really
definitely-
do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I remember that impacting my dad a lot because he was really close with my Nana.
Mhm.
And even to this day, I told Andrew, I think on our first date, I was like, I don't really like, I like flowers, but I also don't. The smell of flowers kind of remind me of a funeral.
Oh.
And it actually the smell of flowers trigger my first memory of entering her funeral. And it was an open casket. And I vividly remember standing there at the age of 10 and I stood by the door.
Right.
And my mom basically had to shove me into the room.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I was like,
That's very traumatic.
I was like, this is,
yes.
I'm seeing my Nana Shirley in a completely different,
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
especially as a 10-year-old, I was like, oh.
I think it's always jarring as a young person, but I think as any age person, open casket is kind of a rough.
It's very hard.
It's for sure.
So with that, what are some strategies that you've developed for overcoming grief? And I'll kick it off with Chelsea first, with your dad. So he took it very hard, losing his mom. Did you, and I know you were young, but did you notice any strategies that he put into place, or?
I don't really remember any strategies that he put into place. I was really young. So I wouldn't say that I remember anything necessarily that he put into place to overcome grief on that end. And I don't even with that specific incident, I don't even necessarily know if I did either. I think it was just kind of we
just
went on with our lives.
Just went on with your lives. So you didn't really talk about it.
I think we did, but I just don't. If we did, I don't remember.
Okay.
As specifically with that incident, but
yeah.
Right. Okay. So Kelly,
I have other. When we hint on things that are other than
outside of death,
in this incident, I do have things of how to respond, but with that one, I just think I was so young.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's also, I think that's probably something good for us maybe to take a little bit deeper dive, because no matter how old you are, you do have emotions and you do have different ways that you're going to react to grief. And I think sometimes we're not paying attention to, to the people, whether they're young or old, and we'll also get into that a little bit more, but I do think it's really important to address,
for sure,
even if you're 10, even if you're 15, or how
to address it.
Yeah.
And
it clearly affected me. I obviously have
it does.
I remember everything from that. And
and so I do think that strategies are really
for sure.
I do. So Kelly, how about you? What are some strategies that you've developed for confronting grief?
Well, surrounding death, I don't necessarily have any that I've developed or even had to traverse at this point in my life. But I will say, though, that being around you and seeing how you've dealt with losing Mac over the last 5 years. So I went, seeing, aside from my friend Kent's funeral service, I hadn't seen my friend Callie since before he was sick. And she and I took a trip together just back in May. And a lot of what she was experiencing and what she would talk about how her grief was feeling and just her thoughts on getting through it and moving just in that space reminded me a lot of everything that you've talked about with your experience. So the strategies and the sort of day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month kinds of emotions and triggers and just different things that you've talked about and how you've navigated that really kind of gave me a lot of insight, so that when I was with her, and she is obviously still going through all of this in a really big way, but just that week that I spent with her and seeing how every day was a little bit different, and we'd, just encountering that with her was really interesting to also see how, while grief for everyone is going to be different, there are some aspects of it that are kind of universal, it seemed to me. And I know that you and she are only two people in my life, but it was it was her significant other. They had been together for over a decade. And so, it was interesting to see those common things come up. And I remember feeling like I was a lot more prepared to be there for her after having been around you than maybe I normally would have, because I haven't gone through that myself in that same kind of way. So that was insightful to me.
Well, and the article that we're referring to today, and that's available on the Washington Post. And again, it's what grief does to your brain. So one of the things that is so important for us to understand is that our stress hormone levels increase, and that's a physical thing that happens to us. And so it's going to affect not only our brain, but it's going to affect our body too. And they call it, so it says the basal ganglia. So it's a group of neurons located deep within the lower portion of the brain, and it becomes more activated. So I think that that's one thing that I'm so glad that we have the research now on that we didn't have maybe 50 years ago. Or, I mean, I don't remember, like, even when I lost my dad, and that was like, let's see, I was 35 years ago. We weren't talking about things like that, of how it affects you physically.
Yeah, no.
But I'm really so happy that we're having these advances, and so we can actually see, yes, this is, this is why you're going through it. It's because, the
well, it makes sense.
Neurons in your brains, right?
I mean, when you get, I always explain it to people like this, if you're performing or making a speech, like, you typically feel butterflies in your stomach, right? You physically feel the nerves, and it's the same thing with grief. You're going to physically feel that heartache or heartbreak or whatever it is,
right? There is such a thing as a broken heart.
Yeah. I mean, it's just even when people that are dealing with, depression, it's like they physically feel it. That's why they can't get out of bed. And
that's right.
So it definitely makes sense that grief correlates physically within your body.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I mean, going back to strategies. So one of the things that I was really very conscious of, after losing Mac, and actually, so, I mean, I'll just back it up to, like, when I lost my dad, I just kind of just rode that sea of, just kind of ups and downs. And, because, I mean, I had a busy life. I had, 2 young boys, running the house, and I did have a wonderful support system, with my husband. So I really, and as I said, we didn't have the information back then. I think maybe, and actually, can you take a look at this, AJ? When was that book about grief, like the 5 stages of grief? When did that come out? I'm just curious. Because, I mean, as I said, I mean, we have really compiled so much more information than we used to have. I mean, we don't have to just power through it anymore. We really don't.
Sure.
Yes. And they're definitely, and I do remember that book, the 5 stages of grief, because
Is the book called On Grief and Grieving?
that I'm not sure. I thought it was just the 5 stages of grief. That's what I thought. But it talks about just the different stages. Like, first you're angry, then or denial. Well, I can't think of all of them now, but, and there again, it's not linear. So if you're angry, and I do remember, feeling, I was like really pissed off.
Yeah.
I'm like, why do, and it really would, and it's funny because I've talked to a really good friend of mine who is also a widow. And one of the things, it doesn't really bother me anymore, but when I would first go out and about, and I would see like couples ignoring each other or, fighting or, things like that. I'm like, why do they, why do I not get to have my spouse? Why they doesn't even look like they like their spouse. So I would be like angry about things like that, So it was like, as I said, I don't feel that way anymore, but I was very angry at first. It's like, why me? Why did this happen to me? I had a great life. I had a great marriage. Why do I have to shift gears? So 2005. That's what I thought. It's a fairly recent book. So that's
The book you're referring to is On Grief and Grieving, Finding the Meaning of Grief Through the 5 Stages.
yes. So 2005. Yes. So my dad passed away in 1988, and I remember that because, actually 89, because Andrew was born the end of 88. My dad died in 89. So yes, so there really wasn't that much information out there. And I wish there had been, like, for my mom.
Yeah.
I think she would have been a better, healthier, stronger person after that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, so let's talk about some strategies for grief, because I do think that's really important. And so I do think it's important to have information
Mm-hmm.
like books, like this article that we just referred to,
sure.
to understand what's going on with you, both emotionally and physically. I also think that it's really important to have a very good support system in
Mhm.
place.
Mhm.
And that, so whether that's family, whether that's friends, you really do need to lean on people because, and actually, that's one of the things that this article talked about was how important
Mhm.
our community is because one of the things that you really feel like doing, you just, when you're going through, especially at the initial stages of grief, when you've first lost someone, you just want to you just don't want to interact with anybody. You don't want to do anything. You just want to curl up in a ball
Mhm.
and really just, pull the covers over your head and, let
Mhm.
life pass you by, so to speak.
Right.
So it is important to have your community. Definitely, isolation is not good at all, and especially too, like when we see people going, like your friend Callie,
Mm-hmm.
or if you know anyone that's recently gone through the death of a loved one, it's really important for us to be paying attention to what's going on in
Mhm.
their lives because they can also get stuck
Yeah.
in grief. And we see that happen a lot. And that's, and then that's when you can't move forward.
I will admit, I'm pretty,
Mhm.
I think one of my faults is that I'm not a very, like, not that I would say, I'm obviously a loving person. I have a hard time, because even one of my good friends, she lost her father, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 years ago. It's been, I think it was maybe a year before Mac passed.
Okay.
So it's been a little bit, but I remember when that happened. And I mean, she's obviously one of my best friends and she knows I love her dearly, but I didn't really know how to react to that because I have never experienced the loss of a parent yet. And from anyone that I've talked to that has experienced that loss, it's obviously very difficult. And so I felt kind of awkward just because I'm like, okay, how would I? And she's kind of like me in the sense of we're like the type of friends that, even in our moments of our weakest like breakups and we'd have like our moment of cry, it's like you cry for a second and then it's like, okay, I'm good. Let's going to the next bar.
You're
Moving on to the next
you're
bar.
very stoic.
We're very stoic and she's like that too. And so I just remember having a really hard time. And I feel like I have a hard time with that even with Andrew. I'm like, I don't know, when Father's Day comes around, it's like, what do you say? And you know what I mean? It's just,
Yeah.
I'm just not very good at that.
Yeah.
I'm learning to be better. I'm learning to be better, but I also don't, I guess that you have to recognize what each individual person maybe wants.
Yeah. I think that's
as well,
Definitely
knowing how to react.
Yeah.
And be there for
But I think conversations like these are so good to have because many times we don't know what to do.
Yeah.
When it comes to our friends losing someone or even our parents because both your Nana and Papa are still alive, so you know that that's coming down the pike, and so your mom will address that in a certain way, and you'll address that in a certain way. But Kelly, I mean, since you do have, Callie is in your life right now and has recently gone through the death of a loved one. So do you have any strategies that you would think that you could draw on from your own personal life that you could share with her?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think not isolating yourself is I think probably the hardest, in my opinion, the hardest challenge to overcome. And that would be the thing I would struggle with the most. And my friend Callie is a very outgoing and social person. She has a ton of friends, whereas I'm a very antisocial person and I don't have a lot of friends. So I think it would be harder for me personally to pull myself out. So in being able to kind of see how she's moved through, because there have definitely been times over the past 6-8 months where she was like making plans and like trying to get out of the house and do stuff. And then the day to do the thing would come and she'd be like, I don't want to do it, And I totally get that. And she did do a fair amount of that. But at the same time, I think she's gotten to a point now where she's really pushing herself, because I think the other part of it is that they had so many shared friends. And so
Mhm.
going out with their shared friends was really hard because
Mhm.
a lot of times you want to tell yourself, like, just distract me from my grief. Let me,
Mhm.
go do something different and new that's not
Mhm.
reminding me of that person. Right.
Mhm.
Mhm.
But I think coming to terms with the fact that you're probably with that person and had spent such a big part of your life with them
Mhm.
because you have so many common interests or things that you love to do. And you shouldn't
Mhm.
necessarily cut those things out of your life
Mhm.
just to distract yourself from what you're feeling. So the
Mhm.
answer to me in that situation is just to feel it and do it.
Mhm.
And then the next time is going to be a little easier. The
Mhm.
next
For
time's
sure.
going to be a little easier than that
Mhm.
until you get to a point where you're fully enjoying those things again.
Mhm.
And you're maybe sad for like a minute that they're not there sharing it with you, but at the same time, you know that they're happy that you're doing it.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
I agree.
So that to me is like one of those strategies that I seem to focus on the most, I think, because that would be and will be the hardest one for
Mhm.
me personally to work
That would
through.
be, yeah, I
Right.
agree.
Right.
That would be the hardest one for me
Yeah.
as well.
Well, and I like that this article, what grief does to your brain. They also talked about that's one of the reasons why we don't want to go out is because we associate so many of those activities with our loved one. And one of the coping tips that they gave, and I think it's really important, and that's one of the things that I've had to learn is you have to start carving out your own interests.
Yes.
So nothing is going to bring you back to, the memory of them. And because you can kind of get stuck
Yeah.
in grief. So,
Yeah.
and I love that. And I love
sure.
that this article talked about that you really do. And that's one of the things that I will share with people, going from we, because I was a we for 35 years to me, so what does that
Mhm.
look like? What is that, we have to put that into practice. But AJ, can you also take a look at what the 5 stages of grief are? I just wanted, I can only remember 2 of them.
So just real
denial,
quick
denial and anger.
before we
because-
get down to that,
Mhm.
speaking about what that bit about in that article about relearning.
Mhm.
So there's this thing that in the article it talks about how it doesn't even have to be like, oh, my partner and I, we always love to go to the symphony. I don't think I can ever go to a symphony
Mhm.
again and enjoy it in the same way. There are those things, but then there's also just the day-to-day, like the day-to-day routine of waking up at a certain time every day and you make the coffee and maybe your
Mhm.
partner made the breakfast or took the dog out for a
Mhm.
walk or something like this, right?
Mhm.
So the stuckness that they refer to in that particular part of that article is a really interesting day-to-day kind of stuck that just makes you want to just throw your hands
Mhm.
up and not do any of it
Mhm.
because all of it is like too overwhelming when every
Mhm.
single part of your day
Yes.
had been associated with and every single like mundane task had to
Mhm.
do
Mhm.
with that person. So like what you were saying about how having to go from we to me,
Mhm.
it's in the article talks about the strategy of relearning your daily habits. So it's like
Mhm.
when you're going to quit smoking or drinking or something
Mhm.
like this, like you reform the structure of
Your
your day
habits,
so that
exactly.
you're diverting yourself from,
100%.
going to the bar or cracking open a beer or, having a cigarette after a meal or something like that. So
Right.
it's a very interesting, like reprogramming
Mhm.
Right.
that you're doing
We really are.
with your brain.
Because we really do have to reprogram our brain. And we also have to relearn how to live our life because, as you just said, even like taking out the garbage.
yeah.
I mean, I had to do that. I'm like, what? I have to feed the pets. Oh, I because it's really very sweet because Mac had his career for many, many years, and I was a stay-at-home mom. But then Sokka was already up and running, so I was a businesswoman, and he had assumed so many of the
Mhm.
responsibilities of the home. And so then I was just like, I just had this moment. I'm like, wah wah, and I still have moments. I'm like, I have to do everything
Yeah.
all by myself,
Well,
and
and of course,
sometimes I'm
that's
just
All
when-
of
like,
the things.
That's when all the things start happening, like the garage door breaks
Yes.
and
Yes.
you have to do all these dumb
Yes.
things that you never had to do. Yeah.
exactly, yeah. So then I have to figure it out by myself. Yes, or like I'll never forget when the power went out, and then I just, I went to hit the garage door opener, and of course it's not working. I mean, I had to YouTube it. It's like, okay, because I didn't have Mac. It's like, hey, how do we do this? There was like so many things like that I did not do, but
Yeah.
I had to relearn it.
Yeah.
and which is really, really important.
Reprogramming your.
So what are the 5 stages of grief? Denial, anger, bargaining,
Yeah.
depression, and acceptance. Thank you.
Bargaining.
The
Bargaining. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're bargaining.
Yeah.
With
Because
the-
I mean, whether or not you pray to whomever or whatever,
Like how you're gonna.
there's this sense of like, please just, there's the take me instead of them, or take, like give me back something for something. So you're wanting to sort of
Mhm.
like make a trade-off of some
Yeah.
sort, to get that person to either come back or still be there or
Well,
whatever.
I think, I don't know if we want to kind of move into this, but I think that we spoke briefly on how grief can also be more than maybe losing someone
Yes.
or,
I think that's
I
great.
don't know.
Let's shift into that because we've touched on death, and that is something that each one of us we will experience. That we will experience a loved one or a
For
friend,
sure.
and especially as
Pet.
we age, and
Beginning.
pets.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very devastating too. Very
Actually,
devastating.
I can't remember what state it is, and it might not even be in the U.S. It's probably in Europe somewhere because they're a lot cooler than we are when it comes to this kind of thing. But there's some piece of legislation out there that is wanting to give people time off for grieving the loss of a pet, just like they would
really?
for the loss of a parent
Uh-huh.
or a spouse
I can.
or a child.
I mean, I'm not going to lie. When Asher goes,
I've gone through.
I will not be well.
I can.
That's a pets, and it's not.
I will not be well.
Yeah.
I can totally
Oh.
get that because you have they're part of your family.
Yeah.
It's like losing a member of your family. So I can actually totally see
sure.
that. At least a
Yeah.
day.
Well, and
At
that's
least a
that's
day.
really big chunk of reprogramming your day-to-day life too, when you no longer
Yes.
are, feeding and
Oh.
taking care of and walking a pet or,
Yes. Yeah.
For sure.
I do remember, losing each one of our pets through the years and how, the house just seems so empty.
yeah.
Even with the loss of a pet. So, okay. So let's talk about some other areas that we can grieve, because that could be a job.
Mm-hmm.
That could be your career. It could be actually a loss of a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a very bad breakup.
Yeah.
I mean, those are just a few of the things that I can think of. So
Yeah.
Chelsea, what would be something outside of losing a loved one that you've grieved?
Well, something that I can think that I physically had something happen to me because of this is I was dating this one guy maybe in my mid to late 20s, I would say. And when we broke up, I got shingles. Like I physically got shingles.
Oh.
And it was horrible because obviously I don't know if anyone has ever had shingles before here.
No, but I hear it's very painful.
It's super painful, and it like took quite a toll on me for a while. I would say for at least like 6 months, I was experiencing nerve pain in the area, even once the rash was gone. But I just, and I know it was specifically related to that breakup because I just was so distraught and upset. And I think I had built up this entire life that I thought we were going to have. But he was completely toxic, and it shouldn't have. It was never going to work.
Wasn't supposed to.
It wasn't supposed
You dodged
to be.
a bullet.
But,
you wouldn't be sitting here.
I wouldn't be sitting here, and my life would just be so different. He was just not a nice guy, to be honest. But yeah, so I would say that was definitely a form of grief that I went through and had to get over, and definitely, just to overcome it. I think, I hung out with friends and, tried to get out of the house and whatnot. But then also when you come down with shingles, it's like no one wants to be around you. You're kind of.
You're also a little contagious too.
You are a little contagious, but just if they touch the rash.
Were you cognizant that shingles most likely entered your life because of the physical grieving that you're going through with that breakup?
So, well, yes.
Or did that maybe even set you on a new trajectory in your life?
It I think that kind of despair sort of lowers your immune system, right? So
it does lower, it lowers your immune system. And then kind of, I know we brought this up in another podcast, but the whole idea of body keeps the score and how your body kind of, takes on like different organs in your body take on aspects of grief or resentment or anger or whatever the emotion is. But that's when I kind of started seeing my holistic doctor that I see, and he does NET, which is net emotional response testing, which I think I've also brought up before. And he correlated the two through doing that with me, and also brought it back to that boyfriend at the time. which maybe at the time before he did that, I didn't necessarily like consciously think, oh, it's connected. But then once he brought it up, I was like, okay, this makes sense.
That's great. Yeah.
You know?
You're able to connect the dots.
And I mean, I would say doing the NET sessions that I did with him did significantly help with me. I don't really know how to describe it in detail, but basically I would say it's like doing 30 years of therapy in like a 30-minute session. It's definitely like a form of therapy. So I guess to me that was a way to release some of those emotions that I felt to move on. So, and I will say after doing that, like I remember walking out of his office and being like, I was like, why the heck did I, like, why was I hung up on this guy? You know what I mean? I'm like, it was kind of like
you could finally put it to bed.
Like an acceptance of like, okay,
right? Which
why?
And that's where we all want to get to is
exactly.
Yes, is acceptance. Yes. And
but yeah.
Sometimes it takes us longer and sometimes it's shorter, but I do believe knowledge is power. And so, yes, the more that we know and the more that we're understanding about grief is.
And I remember my friend Noelle I mean, she always hated that guy. She was like, Chelsea, what are you doing? Like, stop. And it's just, she hated him. And even to this day, I mean, if I bring him up, she's like, oh, good God. But I just remember once that finally transpired and everything ended, she was like, oh, thank God. I'm back. Yeah. So
but Kelly, how about you? What is something that you have grieved in your life outside of losing a loved one?
Well, I've been through a horrible breakup also. I was in my 30s and I was like a semester out of graduating college. So it was real crunch time with like my final thesis projects and very, stressful time anyway. And the person that I was with at the time broke up with me, and we had been together for about almost 10 years. We owned a house together. We like really had a set in our ways kind of life together. And he kind of blew up my entire life because my response to that was finish school. I tried to work as a freelance graphic designer for a few months. And when that felt just too hard, I just packed up my stuff and blew up my life again and moved back to California from St. Louis. Like it was tough to leave my friend Callie, who's in St. Louis, because she really helped me a lot through that whole thing. And I'll never forget how much she and Kent were there for me during that. And we've managed to stay friends all these years later. But for me at the time, like really the only way that I could cope with that was just to like physically remove myself from
separate yourself
just so completely. Yes. And I wish I could say that it ended clean and neat right there, but it didn't necessarily. But ultimately, I don't know that, running away from it is the best strategy. But at the time, that was what I had to do, or else I was just going to.
Well, so I'm curious. So how long before grief became easier to manage?
It was a long time, actually. Because
did you even realize that you were grieving?
I did, because I did go through I was super angry. I, like you, I would see cute, happy couples on the street and I would just want to like go and kick them in the shins.
No, that was like, I was just like, so.
Did you?
Well, they weren't cute and happy. They were like people ignoring each other. And I'm like, what the heck?
I was mad at
No, you get to keep
Did you date anyone like early on?
Not right away, no. Yeah. And I actually like, he had left me for someone else. So then I had that whole other anger issue to deal with of just being like super, I felt very, like my self-confidence was really low. And so what I managed to do though was kind of I turned it around in this sort of, okay, well, this is what I'm going to do. And I went and got a really great job at a really great company and like a really great apartment and started making a lot of really good money. And that all felt like huge
I saw
wins.
TikTok about this because it said if a guy gets broken up with, like typically he's the one that ends up in the worst spot than the woman. Because if you break up with a woman, she will. Like,
I will show you.
She will get a better job. She will start making more money. She will get a complete makeover, and she will prove that you.
Great. So TikTok's even.
No, it's
covering this.
It's totally true, though.
You're ahead of your time, Kelly.
It was actually
you're ahead of your time.
After I broke up with that one guy, I was like, I'm going to get my real estate license. And I was like,
I mean, there is something like I think the breakup grief thing is a really interesting form of grief, because and the difference between like a breakup grief and a death grief is that I do think there's this sense of death grief where you know it's always going to be a part of your life, and you're just like that jar, the jar analogy that you have, the graphic is like it's always going to be there, but you fill up the space with other things.
Right.
Okay? So, but breakup grief is different because I think it can actually, I think the feelings of anger, if you're the heartbroken one, can be so strong that it motivates you to really do something different. And that could be getting a new job. It could be moving across the country. It can be all kinds of things that end up benefiting you, hopefully, in the long run. And if you can look back at that time and be like, yeah, I was really sad about that for a really long time, but it led me to all of these other things that now, this many years later, make my life great. So there's a difference with that, I think, but I do think that emotionally and physically you can still experience the same.
I think you are. You definitely are going through the same
heartbreak,
the same stages.
Yeah.
So I did want to just briefly touch on and we have just talked about how much more information there is now about grief that we didn't have 30 years ago, which I think is great, both physically and emotionally. But do you think that we've seen a shift in society's attitude towards grief? Do you think that
100%?
Do you think that we tend to, and this could also just be cultural too, but so we'll just focus on the U.S. Do you think that in the U.S. that we deal with grief head on, or do you think we kind of skirt the issue a little bit still?
I think nowadays we deal with it more head on. I think that even like when my grandmother died in 1999, I was 23. And my family, I come from my dad's side of the family are very stoic people. So I'm not sure if things would be different with them now. But at the time, like she passed away and that was it. Like no one talked about grandma. That was it. Right. Like that was,
I know.
It's really hard, but
I'm not laughing at that. It's just, it's like,
I know, but that's a very common,
which actually could have been what happened with my Nana Shirley, to be honest.
But I mean, we as individuals would talk about her, like my sister and I would talk about her and share memories. My mom would jump in and share memories. But in terms of like my dad really being there to like talk us through, did not happen. You know, and his brother, my uncle, once my grandma died, he was so heartbroken over her loss, he just shut down. So there's the stiff upper lip culture that I think does exist, like just kind of tangentially at this point, because we still have people from that generation that are here with us. But I think that the whole idea of mental health just as a whole has
gotten better.
Such a huge aspect of our modern lives in the US that the grief part of it can never be left aside from that whole mental health.
People are more open to talking about it, which I think is good because, I mean, to be honest, I think that's exactly what happened with my Nana Shirley is that it was like, okay, like now we're just going to pretend like we're going to move on. And I mean, as a 10-year-old, you're like, I literally just saw her in an open casket. Like what's going on here? You know? So but I think it's good though, that we're facing it more head on.
Yeah.
And before we head into our next section, which I love, which is new and noteworthy, but before that, I think it's really important for us to, because people are tuning in to listen to this show. So what solid advice can we give someone confronting grief? Thoughts? I mean, I can kick it off because I really do think, and this is something that, and I'll pass this on to both of you. Definitely a message from Mom. It's that we have to be very cognizant when people lose someone in their life, and to keep one eye on them. You don't have to be like babysitting them, or you don't have to be like interfering in their life or telling them what to do. But with all the different stages of grief, we have to be thoughtful of they may get stuck in one of them. And we don't ever want people to get stuck in grief, because grief, as I said at the beginning, is something that you have to work through it. It's not something that you just cannot sidestep grief, but it does take time and it does take a lot of hard work. And so I just had a friend that just lost her father. And at the very beginning, there's so much activity going on. I mean, first is, the emotions are just so raw. And then there's so many activities that are going on and people coming in and out. And then it's after that,
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's a month later, 2 months later, 6 months later. Those are the important milestones.
It's so quiet.
So I will very much give you the advice just to keep an eye on that person that's going through it. Don't let them get stuck in their grief, and don't let them become isolated, because those are two things that are just too easy to happen. And with all of the information that we have now, and there's so many people to reach out to for help.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you may need professional help, or it may just be like a grief group that you could go to. There's so many of those. And I can just remember, because Mac was in hospice before he passed away. So they were very thoughtful and gave me all this information and literature and all of that for me to go through, that if I did get stuck in one phase of grief, that definitely to reach out.
Well, even you don't even have to share your own experience, but just listening to other people share theirs maybe helps you feel a lot less alone in your grief, because other people are going through what you're going through. So that in and of itself, I think, can be a really helpful.
I would just say to like sit with the person, like you said, be there for them. You don't necessarily have to talk or say anything, but just letting them know that you're there. And, you know, if they want to talk, then they can. But I don't think you always have to be like, I'm sorry.
No one wants that.
You can just,
no, I don't think anyone wants
I think that's, just
be there. And, you know, if they want to talk, then they'll talk.
Which I think it's an interesting tightrope, I think, to walk, because I went through this with Callie and Kent, and she had been sick with a very rare cancer the year before he got sick. And so I went through this with her. We've been in this now for a couple years. And she got to a point where she was like, I have cancer. Like, yeah, it really sucks. But if I get one more mug from someone that says, you know, kick cancer in the ass, she's like, I'm going to smash it over their head.
I know, right?
You know? Like, so there's a certain point at which, like, needing to know, like, being there for someone without overwhelming them, but like knowing what kind of support they need. Like, not everybody is going to need the same kind of.
And you want to be, and you somewhat want to normalize your life.
Yeah.
After a while, and so that's like. I can totally get that with Callie.
Yeah.
Getting another bug about that. It's like, yes, I am going through this, but I also have other aspects of my life too.
I'm trying not to make my whole life be about this really stupid thing.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Yeah. So that's important.
Yeah. So I really do think the big takeaway from this podcast today is to understand that grief is very personal. There are different stages that you're going to go through if you are the one that has lost that loved one or career, or, I mean, we've chatted a little bit. I mean, grief doesn't necessarily mean just the loss of a loved one, but just to be mindful of those things. But one piece of advice that I always give is that you have to keep moving forward. And you did bring up that graphic, and this is a podcast, so you can't see the graphic, but just picture a big, or actually just a ball, just a regular size ball. And first it's in a very small jar, and then it moves to a medium sized jar, and then a large jar. But the ball stays the same, but you can see the space around it expands. And that's us building our life around the grief.
Yeah.
I truly do believe that. I think grief always stays the same, but it's how we go about building our lives back up that you're able to cope with it
for sure.
much more effectively and efficiently. So,
so
if you are going through grief right now, know that you're not alone. It touches everyone, and that there is help and that there is hope. So, ladies, we are going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with my favorite segment, because I can't wait to hear what your new or noteworthy items are this week. And we're back with new and noteworthy. So I'm so excited, because this is where we really get to just act like girls and share what we've either shopped or read or watched. And I'm telling you, there's some really good TV shows out there.
There are.
We're taping this in June of 2024, but there's a couple on my horizon, but I've come across some really good ones. But I'm actually talking about a book today. But Chelsea, why don't you kick us off with new and noteworthy? What do you have?
So mine's a TV show. It's on Apple TV. It's called Dark Matter. I don't know. Has anyone watched it here? Have you?
I'm in the middle of it.
You're in the middle of it?
Wow.
It's
really good.
We're caught up now. And I won't,
Really good.
give away anything,
No.
but I mean, it's basically about,
Is this the one with Jennifer Connelly, by the way?
Yes.
yes.
She's so beautiful.
Oh, she is.
Aging with Grace. Right?
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But it's basically about this scientist, and he develops this way of going through different universes,
Mhm.
and this system that or this idea that there could be a multiverse, and just how you get to the different universes and using your
Mhm.
subconscious. And obviously there's a way that he does it, what he creates.
Right.
But speaking of grief, there's actually kind of I feel like when he's going through this, it's kind of, he's trying to get back to a certain life. And it's every universe that he enters into, he's like, okay, this isn't the right one. And, it's just,
That's interesting.
so, I'm caught up right now. I think there's,
How many more episodes?
I don't know.
Is it just one season? That's what I was wondering. Is it just
I
one
don't know either.
one and done?
I think there's 7 episodes right now. So
there's 10 total. Apple
Probably.
seems to do these 10 episode limited.
I don't know if it's short series or if it's going to be I guess we'll find out.
We'll find out.
It's good though.
Yes, it is.
It's a little dark, but
Mhm.
hence the name.
It is,
good.
but it's very, very good. It's very,
a little sci-fi.
yes, a little sci-fi,
Yeah.
but not too much.
No, not too much.
I mean, I just, that's probably just, the metaverses or the multiverses or whatever you call
exactly.
it. It's a little matrixy.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know.
I recommend.
But yes, I can recommend that too, because I'm watching it as well. And it's really has
Really good.
captivated my attention.
We'll have to check
Very
it out.
much so. Yes. So
Mhm.
and Dark Matter, it's on Apple TV, right?
It's on Apple TV.
Mhm.
Yep.
Starring Jennifer Connelly. I'm not sure who the lead male is.
I can't remember.
I had
his
never
name.
seen. I had never
No, I
seen
don't
him
think I've seen him
before.
before either.
He seemed new to me. I'm sure he's been out there acting for a while.
Yeah, I'm
but
sure.
I couldn't place him
Mm-mm.
in anything like Jennifer.
Yeah.
So, okay, Kelly, what do you have for us this week?
Okay. So my pick this week is it's a new book called When Women Ran Fifth Avenue, Glamour and Power at the Dawn of American Fashion. And it's by Julie Satow.
Mm-hmm.
And in this book, she basically covers the origin story all the way through the rise to power, success, and then not the downfall necessarily, but the end of these women's careers.
Mm-hmm.
So she covers Dorothy Shaver at Lord and Taylor
Mm-hmm.
in 1921. Let's see, there's 2 other women. Sorry, I thought I had it pulled up. But what is so interesting about this book, not only is it historically accurate
Mhm.
about these 3 women who became basically the presidents and CEOs of these. So it was Lord and Taylor,
Mm-hmm.
Bonwit Teller,
Mhm.
and what was the other one? So sorry,
Gosh, I don't even think
Henry
Bonwit-
Bendel.
Henry Bendel.
So they were the first women that started off in these roles, and they didn't start out at CEO, but they worked their way from
Mhm.
executive level up to C level. And I'm amazed that these women managed to get to where they got to, and how not only that they got there when they did, because we're talking about the first half of the 20th century,
Right.
starting in 1902.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And they get to these crazy heights that women had never gotten to before. And all along the whole way, they're revolutionizing the way that we shop.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was Dorothy Shaver that invented the idea of a personal shopper.
Mm-hmm.
The whole craze of window displays started happening during their time. So they were hiring people like Salvador Dali to do window displays. I mean, it's just amazing
That's
little chunks of
that's
retail
cool.
history and
Mhm.
fashion history.
mm-hmm.
And so the story it kind of jumps between the different timelines of each of these 3 women. And it is so captivating, and it reads like a novel.
Oh, nice.
So it's kind of fun to reflect on it as you're you hear these facts and you're like, wow, is that? And it is a real fact. So anyway, it was a really fun, I got it on audio
Mm-hmm.
book. So it was really fun to listen to. I highly recommend it. It was just reviewed very highly and was recommended as a summer read on NPR Fresh Air.
Nice. I love it.
So yeah,
Yeah.
really fantastic book. So When Women Ran Fifth Avenue.
Love it. Thank you.
Nice.
Yeah.
So mine is also a book, and this is a new book to me, actually a new author to me. So this is from my Pilates crew. They read a lot. since it is summertime, we were just like talking about beach reads and, super easy reads. So the author is Abby Jimenez, and the book is Part of Your World. And actually it's just a little romance novel, but it's very well done. But what I loved about it, so this is really, I just had a personal connection already with this author, is because she lives in Minneapolis. And so this book actually is set in Minnesota. It's a little town south of Minneapolis, but we also lived in Rochester, Minnesota. So they talk about Rochester because it's small towns close to Rochester. So it was just a really nice connection that way.
Yeah.
But I was so impressed with her. So not only is she a New York Times bestseller now, she's written at least a dozen romance novels by now. And I've just read this one, which is very, very good. So I will go back and pick up some other of her books as well. And she does series as well.
Okay.
But Kelly, I think you'll really appreciate this because she's a foodie and she was a Food Network star winner.
Oh, wow.
She won the Cupcakes War on the Food Network.
Wow.
And I thought that was pretty
That is
cool.
cool.
So she's a foodie and she actually owns in Minneapolis. It's called Nadia Cape's Cupcake Shop.
Oh.
And I do think that they ship worldwide.
Oh,
so
do they really?
yeah, so I don't
Order
know.
some of her
Yeah,
cupcakes.
for a birthday or something like
be
that,
fun.
we could get that. But
Did you
thought that was so impressive.
Did you listen to this book or did you have the physical copy?
I listened to it.
Yeah. How was the
Mhm.
narration? Was it?
It was good because they go, like many romance novels, they go between two perspectives, so the male and the female. So, but they've done a really good job.
Okay.
Sometimes sometimes they can kind of not do a good job.
Yeah.
And honestly, so here's a funny thing about audiobooks. I personally think this, but you can tell me, do you listen to books ever, Chelsea? Or do you mostly read them?
I mostly read them, but I have done a few audiobooks before.
I think a lot of it, if you're going to enjoy that book, has to do with the narration.
Oh, it really.
Oh, for
If
sure.
you have
Yeah.
a terrible narrator, I would say jump ship and just go buy the book.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then put the voices that you want to the
Especially-
head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget. Oh, now I can't even remember the book, but Tom Hanks narrated it. Oh gosh, it's a really good book too. It's like one of my favorite authors. Now it's completely slipped my mind. Tom Hanks narrated. I have to look that up. But Kelly, what do you think about?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, especially if the book is on a subject that you're really interested in, if the narrator is terrible and you're like, oh no, this is tragic, then put away the audiobook and go and read the book. Cause you don't want to miss out on a good book just cause the narrator is.
That's right. Okay. So I The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. So that is that is a book that Tom Hanks narrated. And I was that was a book club book. So we discussed it. And everybody that loved the book listened to it narrated by Tom Hanks. And those that didn't like the book just read it on their own. So we were like, so that was like the first thing. I was like, I wonder if that really has something to do, because it really is. It's how the story is being presented to you.
Yeah.
But anyway,
For sure.
so Abby Jimenez, love her. Okay, ladies, let's raise our glass once again, because we are finished with another episode of Message from Mom.
All right. It's a
Thank
wrap.
you. Where we are busting the myth that mothers-in-law aren't necessarily monsters-in-law.